quick review that you're all smarter than Harvard graduates now, right? You know why it's hotter at the equator than it is at the poles. You know why we have seasons, which are two very related questions, but that do have different answers. Remember, it's the shape of the Earth that changes the angle of heating to cause that difference that we call latitude effects. And it's the tilt of the Earth as its position around the orbit around the sun changes that tilts either the top half or the bottom half of the globe towards the sun and causes those seasons for the temperate zones. Then we learned that weather is hard, right? That's about the size of it. That the fact that air and water are fluids, to what a physicist would call fluids, that move when you heat them and carry heat with them, means that stuff like this happens, right? So that's the beginning of it. But then there's more, because wind and water interact, which is why Europe is warmer than it should be. The Earth is bumpy, which is why we have deserts to the west of our mountain ranges in the United States. And the Earth is spinning, which is why weather patterns are spiral when you look at them in the satellite view. So weather is hard, and we left it there, and then you explored some of that NASA satellite data and did your homework, which I'll check here momentarily. But that's where we are. We really just have one more thing to talk about. The thing we have left to talk about is something that climate causes, which is that certain types of ecosystems kind of happen again and again on this planet. They repeat. They're not exactly the same, but the climate conditions and the soil conditions and those other abiotic factors tend to create types of ecosystems. And we call those types of ecosystems biomes. If you had to guess, what do you think the two most important abiotic factors are in determining which biome is going to grow where?
Abiotic means like not living.
Yeah.
So temperature.
Temperature, absolutely. Temperature is top two. What do you suppose the other one is?
Is it elevation?
No, that's really good though. That's a good one. Elevation definitely changes things, but it's not top two. I'll give you a hint. It's the difference between, say, a rainforest and a desert.
Water.
Meaning, yeah, temperature, precipitation. Those are the big two. Yep. And so really that's all we are going to worry about as far as biomes go this chapter. You've already talked about biomes plenty. You built your little diorama of a rainforest or whatever you did. So you're not going to have to know all the dominant things in each biome. Be good to know which one we're in. So we'll talk about that. But mostly we're just going to kind of rank them in terms of temperature and precipitation. We'll start with temperature. And by rank them, in this case, I just mean we're going to put them in the right zones. So the polar zone, right, above 66.5 degrees north latitude, below 66.5 degrees south, it's, of course, cold. So we are going to find ice caps, which is a biome, not a very diverse one, but it's a biome. Tundra, which you knew already. And then the other one. What's the other cold biome? Do you know? Think Canada, Minnesota, Wisconsin. Huh? Did you say trees? Yeah. What kind of trees? What kind of trees do you find where it's cold? Yeah, coniferous, pine-ish type trees. There's two names for this one. It's either called the taiga, which is actually a Russian word. I don't know what it means. or boreal forest. Boreal actually means northern. But yeah, it's a whole bunch of pine trees, or at least coniferous trees, with needles for leaves, which is a water-saving adaptation, because most of the water in these northern biomes is locked up as ice. So that's the big three in the polar zone. Taiga actually overlaps into the temperate zone, so then we'll list that first. Temperate zone, of course, you're going to find the most diverse, largest range of ecosystems because the weather is so, and climate is so variable. So all the way from taiga, the temperate forest, those are more broad-leafed trees that lose their leaves in the fall in that season. This, by the way, is generally the dominant one in our area. We would live in a temperate forest with the occasional grassland scattered in if we hadn't cleared most of that land. Temperate rainforest exists. You got to drive pretty far to get to it in this country. Be up in the northwestern United States and up into Canada. Beautiful area. Vancouver, off the coast, is a good place to find temperate rainforest. Also sometimes called northwest coniferous forest. Then we got temperate grassland, which is, you know, Kansas, Nebraska. You see little stretches of it around here. Not a lot. And then desert exists in the temperate zone, especially where there's those rain shadows. And desert is another overlapper into the tropical zone. But of course, also in the tropical zone, we've got tropical rainforest and tropical grassland, as well as desert. In that tropical zone, temperature really isn't a factor, right? The temperature is warm year-round. And so in the tropics, what biome is where is pretty much entirely determined by how much precipitation. So that's half of it. That's the temperature profile. And again, this is just kind of, you don't have to know these like in order necessarily on a test. What I'll ask you is which zone does each one belong in? So if I said, you know, taiga, you'd have to know, well, that's both in the polar and the temperate zone. You're not going to, this order within the zone doesn't matter. Okay, you just got to know which ones go where. Make sense? All right, let's do precipitation. We start with the forests. You don't see forests unless there's a decent amount of rainfall or precipitation. Rainforest, obviously, both kinds. Those are on top. Those win. Temperate forest still takes a fair amount of rainfall to support big trees like that. Pine trees, like I said, needles are an adaptation to save water. And so they can live in places where either there's not as much rainfall or the water is locked up as ice for a lot of the time. If there's not quite enough rainfall to support a forest, what do we get? Instead of trees, you get grasslands. Temperate grasslands, tropical grasslands. Tropical grassland, another word for that is savanna. And savannas are really just one step away from deserts. Then we've got the really dry places. Really dry because water is locked up as ice for a whole lot of the year. That's a tundra. or because it just doesn't precipitate rain very much. That would be desert, which is really pretty much defined by its lack of rainfall. This is the easier of the two, the rainfall or the precipitation ranking, because there's a rule of thumb. It becomes pretty obvious that you can tell how much rainfall a place is getting by how big its producers are. Forests are wetter than grasslands, are wetter than deserts and tundras. Again, we're not going to go through what lives in each of these ecosystems, what lives in each of these biomes. You ought to have a general idea of what the vegetation looks like, and that's mostly in the name, right? It's a grassland, it's a forest, desert, tundra. But knowing the relative rainfalls and temperatures means that you're not going to be freaked out when a question on the state air test looks like this. Stare at that for a minute and see if you can figure out what's going on. The basic question was, okay, looking at the identified biomes on the graph, figure out what the other ones are that just have letters. What biomes are W, X, Y, and Z? So stare at that for a minute, see if you can figure it out. This, by the way, is from an actual air test. Starting to make sense? So first of all, you gotta look at the two axes, right? The y-axis is temperature, annual average temperature, that's what mean means. And x-axis is precipitation in centimeters, right? And so low precipitation, low temperature, high temperature. So what do you think? Can you knock out one as maybe the easy one to identify? You got one? Reagan?
W is a desert.
W is a desert, absolutely. Because why? How do you tell, Reagan?
It has a high temperature and low precipitation.
It has a high, well, it's got a high top temperature. It's kind of variable, right? Which points to a temperate biome, which deserts are. And then really low precipitation, which defines deserts. Absolutely, we got W out of the way. What else can you do, Tristan? Yeah. Y is rainforest. I totally agree. Yeah, because it beats everything precipitation-wise, right? It's definitely the highest precipitation. What about temperature?
Z is coldest.
Hang on, what about temperature for the rainforest?
Yeah.
Temperature really hot, it's really humid.
Okay, the temperatures are high. That's one way to describe it. How else could you describe that temperature range? Something that definitely points to a tropical rainforest. Yeah, it's narrow, right? We're not talking about a big range of temperatures like we are with these. This is definitely tropical because it doesn't vary very much at all. Right? It's a very narrow range of temperatures. You'll find that if you go to the tropics. It's like 80 something all day, every day. Good. Well, there's just one left. X. What were you saying about X?
Oh, that's in Z with the thunder.
Oh, I forgot about Z. Yeah, Z. Why is it tundra?
It's the coldest.
Coldest and?
It is very low precipitation.
Yeah, cold and dry kind of defines tundra. Good, good. So X is the hard one, right? What do you think X is?
Would it be like the savanna, or would it be the like a temperate forest, something like that?
A temperate forest?
Oh wait, no, sorry, temperate. I was thinking like savanna then.
Savanna, or what's your other choice that this might be? So savanna is a tropical grassland. This could also be a temperate grassland. Which one do you think that's more likely to be? Probably the temperate. Why?
It could lower precipitation.
Okay, so that's what makes it a grassland. Absolutely. This is a grassland because it gets less precipitation than either of the forests, but not as little as the desert. So that puts it firmly in grassland territory. What makes it tropical, Leah? The temperature varies quite a bit, as opposed to what I pointed out here, right? That this is a real narrow range that makes that tropical. This is a way wide range that makes that temperate. So that's a temperate grassland. Good job. So you've gotten all those questions right. Right? But it's one of those things where you can't panic on a question like this. You got to just start knocking out the easy ones first and then figuring out the rest based on what's left. Good.